So, two questions I get asked a lot are who am I and what do I do? Well, since this channel has been inactive for about 3 years now, I've decided to finally put it to use, and what better way to start it off than by answering those two questions. Who am I and what do I do? So, I was born on November 10th, 1994 in the Canadian city of Winnipeg, Manitoba. I came into this world 2 years later than my only sibling, my sister, and at 10 pounds and 9 ounces, I was such a beast of a baby that I had to be cut out from my mom's uterus. Obviously, I won't go into great detail about this, but if you feel inclined to do some research, the operation is called a cesarean, which I spelled completely wrong on this paper. Although I don't really remember much of my early childhood, I do know that my parents got divorced when I was still pretty young, and for this reason, I wasn't as affected as I probably should have been by it. It was never really seeing my parents together that would make me happy, it was just being able to see my parents in general. As long as I was still spending time with them, I really didn't feel like I had much to worry about. I remember that some of my best childhood memories involved playing Nintendo 64. At a very early age, I used to go to preschool, and when I'd get home, my mom would make me lunch while I sat down and played Ocarina of Time. Nintendo was like my thing growing up. I played it at parties, at friends' houses, at my mom's house, at my dad's house. Pretty much if there was a Nintendo 64, I was there playing it. I also played baseball for a few of my elementary years, but I really sucked at it, so let's just move on. If you've ever seen a Mindless Misfits video, you'd probably know I have the tendency to be an idiot, and that tendency began early. When I was going through elementary, me and my friends always played crazy games and did stupid things. If I had to choose a top 3 for dumbest childhood pastimes, the first would most likely be doing front flips off of play structures and flat out landing on my back. Why me and my friends did this, I have no idea, but it's a miracle that I don't have severe back problems to this day. My number 2 dumb pastime isn't as stupid, but was nowhere near being smart. If you've ever heard of King of the Hill, you'd probably know that it's basically just a bunch of kids trying to push each other off of a hill. We would play this game with 10 to 20 people during winter on top of hills that were surrounded by chain link fences. I don't really need to explain to you what makes that a terrible idea. Now, the final dumb pastime was simply just wrestling. Basically, me and my friends would tackle each other until we'd fall to the ground, and long story short, the last one standing was a winner. Aside from being a complete idiot during elementary, I also grew very fond of 2 things that I still love today, and that is music and drawing. I remember that the first artists I used to listen to were pretty much all mainstream ones from just about every genre. Some of these included Eminem, Shania Twain, Aqua, and the Black Eyed Peas. Now, it was near the end of elementary that some friends began to introduce me to what I thought was the coolest music ever, and that was classic rock. I also started listening to a band by the name of Billy Talent, a group that continues to be one of my 2 favorite bands of all time. I think I was in grade 4 when they released their self-titled album in 2003, and God do I love that album. The other thing that I grew fond of, drawing, turned out to be quite a large part of my later elementary school years. Since an early age, I had always been told by friends, family, and even teachers that I have quite some talent when it comes to drawing. I remember I used to actually take requests from classmates on what to draw, then they would pay me to draw that request for them. And we're not talking like $6 or something here, we're talking elementary school pay. This could be anything from apple juice cartons, pencils and erasers, or if I was lucky, maybe even a few quarters. The reason I mention this is because a funny thing happened during, I believe, grade 5. I had been drawing a picture of Link from the Legend of Zelda series, and when I finished, one of my frequent customers, we'll call him Bob, wanted to buy it from me. Although I had initially drawn it for myself, when he offered me a juice box and 50 cents, I mean, how could I resist? Yet, seconds before I actually sold him my drawing, another classmate of mine offered me a pencil, some change, and an eraser for the drawing. Unfortunately for Bob, I liked the second offer better and refused to sell my drawing. Long story short, Bob was soon in tears and trying to hit me with one of the school chairs. I think the worst part of this story is the fact that it actually happened. Anyway, since both Bob and my other customer were both acting like little whiny babies, I decided to just keep the drawing for myself. As a matter of fact, I still have it today. And to think kids were actually fighting over this work of art. So, aside from all the fond memories that were made at school during my childhood, most of my other memories were made during summer holidays at our family's cottage. As certain people know, one of my favorite places to be is a small city located in the province of Ontario by the name of Kenora. The reason for this is because Kenora was like the go-to city when me and my family were staying at our cottage, and that's probably because it was like 15 minutes away. It's an amazing place, and between this city and our family cottage, so many great memories are made during my childhood. Although I could say much more about Kenora and my cottage, that would most likely add a good few hours to this video. So with that said, these memories conclude what was, for the most part, my carefree childhood. As much as I'd like to talk about my middle school years as though they were carefree and fun like my childhood, I would be lying. Puberty didn't happen to me as quickly as it happened to some other kids, and this resulted in weight gain since I didn't really start growing until the end of grade 8. For the first 2.5 years of middle school, I was so insecure about myself that I literally wore a sweater every day. This included 30-degree weather, which would be 86 Fahrenheit to you American and other Fahrenheit folk. At this point, it probably doesn't come as much of a surprise when I admit that I was bullied during middle school. Although I won't go into great detail about this, as I don't really think bullies deserve the attention, I will admit that it got pretty bad. There was actually this one kid who stuck clay in my hair once, and I had to cut it to get it out. Aside from being bullied, I also started having these obsessive urges to organize and maintain everything. I'm not sure of the reasoning behind this, if there was even any for that matter, but I remember that if I left anything on my floor before going to bed, I would spend anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes straightening that stuff out. One time my aunt actually saw me doing this and thought it would be funny to move the stuff around and see if I would notice. Basically, it wasn't that funny and I did notice. Now, while some people would call these kind of obsessions a result of having OCD, I actually went to the doctor a few years back and he basically told me what I was experiencing was nowhere near severe enough to be OCD. Instead, he suggested that I might have something called OCPD, which, somewhat ironically, sounds worse but actually isn't. So, these days, that's what I use to justify all my obsessive whack job activities. Anyway, aside from bullying and mental issues, I also found out sometime during middle school that we'd be losing our family cottage. I won't get into great detail about this, but basically the death of my grandparents led to certain family tensions, which then led to our cottage being sold. Although I'm still pretty sad about that to this day, I will admit that it did lead to some positive experiences. For example, me and my family started traveling more often to make up for the time we would have otherwise spent at the cottage. We've been to places like New York, Boston, the Badlands, and even Mount Rushmore, just to name a few. The loss of our cottage also meant that I had to find other things to do during summer vacation, and one of those things ended up being bike riding. To me and my friends, bike riding was as cool as getting your first car when you turned 16. We would ride our bikes everywhere we went, and we went to a lot of places. It was during my middle school years that me and my friends started hanging out at a place called Perico Hill, a place that I still love to this day. It's like this big hill near my house on the outskirts of the city where people would just throw all kinds of junk and basically go four-wheeling. Honestly, it was just a cool, relaxed place to be. Sound a little cliche, it was a place that felt like our own. I guess it was kind of like an escape. Anyway, aside from bike riding and traveling, middle school was also the first and last time that my family had a pet. He was literally called an Escapoo, a cross between an Eskimo dog and a poodle, and it was my genius idea to name him Dexter. Unfortunately, we didn't have this dog very long because he was just plain crazy. I can remember more than one time that I had to chase him because he either tried to run out our open front door or try to escape while we were taking him for a walk. He even ran through a soccer game at a park once, and I was the lucky guy who had to chase him. I think the best story I have of Dexter though is this one time I was eating breakfast. Being the energetic pooch that he was, I guess he got a little excited about food and decided to take a flying leap at me. Little did I know he was interested in a different kind of food, and wouldn't you know it, he chomped right between my legs. Obviously I screamed like a little girl and tried my best to shoo him away. Although there was a tiny bit of blood, it really wasn't so bad, and I'm glad to announce that every part of me still survives to this day. Eventually, we decided that Dexter was just too much of a handful and we decided to give him up. Even though he did act up almost constantly and attacked a very important part of me, I really do hope he's doing well after all these years. So, going back to the topic of middle school, there actually were some positive things that happened there, believe it or not. Middle school was a point in my life when I really started to become aware of my love for video production. Me and my friends would watch YouTube comedy sketches and just go to school and talk about them like they were the greatest and funniest things ever. Specifically, we really enjoyed Smosh and F&D films, though keep in mind this was around 2006 and 2007. Things were a little different back then, and this doesn't only apply to YouTube channels, but also the outrageous price of cameras. Take a look at these. They're Future Shop advertisements for what used to be some of the newest and hippest cameras around that time period. Yeah, an $1,100 camera then would cost you like $50 now on Kijiji, or I guess Craigslist for you American folk. Anyway, me and my friend definitely didn't have the money for one of these beasts, so instead we used a video option on a picture camera that didn't even have sound. One of the first videos I can remember making with my friend was called The Teleporting Boot, and I guess because of the lack of audio, it was kind of like a Charlie Chaplin-esque production. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, but it still holds a dear place in my heart for being one of the very first videos we actually took relatively seriously. Eventually, I got an MP3 player for Christmas, and it had this option on it that let you record audio. At the time, this seemed really advanced, and from then on I used my picture camera to record video and my MP3 player to record audio. If that wasn't bad enough, I would then sync the audio and video together in the masterclass of editing programs, Windows Movie Maker. After some time, me and my friends started making other videos since we now had the power of audio at our fingertips. We would then upload these videos to our first real YouTube channel, Slick Productions. This channel still exists today, but there's only one very old Cinnamon Challenge video on it from like 2010. Although I wouldn't suggest it, if you feel inclined to take a trip down memory lane, you can always go check it out. So anyway, another passion of mine aside from video production that really started to bloom during middle school was writing. I'd kind of stopped drawing during those years and instead started writing quite often. The reason for this was most likely because of my huge interest in telling stories, especially fictional ones. This obviously extends outside of writing, otherwise I probably wouldn't love making videos as much as I do. I actually enjoyed writing stories so much that I started working on what I believed was going to be some kind of best-selling book. This was during the summer of 2006, and although I don't remember the exact date I finished writing this book, I do remember showing it to a great majority of my grade 7 classmates. I would get them to read the whole thing and then leave a comment on a piece of paper in the back that gave their opinion on the book. Surprisingly enough, the comments were actually pretty positive, even though the book did kind of suck in retrospect. I guess I was pretty proud of it at the time though, because during that same year I started writing a sequel which was going to be longer, more action-packed, and more suspenseful. Unfortunately, I didn't actually end up finishing that for whatever reason. So the last thing I want to talk about in regard to my middle school years is my ever-changing taste in music. Music has always played a large part in my life, and as some of you may know, I'm a pretty big fan of metal and all its subgenres. This wasn't always the case though. Up until about grade 8, I'd been listening to classic rock for the most part, which changed significantly when I saw an amazing documentary called Metal: A Headbanger's Journey. This movie exposed me to bands I didn't even know existed, such as Enslaved, Autopsy, Gorgoroth, and a number of other cool metal bands. More importantly, for the sake of my story though, this was the first time I was exposed to a band you may have heard of called Cannibal Corpse. At this point, I should probably add that I wasn't drawn to this music because I thought that it was good, but I was actually drawn to it because of its shock value. It was kind of like the same feeling as discovering some of the scariest, goriest horror movies you could possibly find. There's this one song in particular that I remember writing down and showing to all my friends who seemed equally shocked to find out that a song like that even existed. Keep in mind that this was a time that kids were finding music off programs like LimeWire and Pirates Bay, not YouTube. The chances of a middle school kid finding a band like Cannibal Corpse were much lower back then. Anyway, I won't bother saying or writing down the name of this song, but if you feel ever so inclined to find it, it's track number 7 off of Cannibal Corpse's album Tomb of the Mutilated. Little did I know that in years to come, this music would stop being shock value and actually become something I enjoyed listening to. Not only would I see Cannibal Corpse more than once in my near future, but also over 50 other metal and hard rock bands. So by the time I was starting high school, I finally managed to grow out of my chubby and awkward looking body. Unfortunately, due to the complete change in environment, I was a pretty introverted kid during my first year and for this reason continued to get bullied. I started to draw again since I didn't really have many people to talk to during class, and to be honest, I actually think this period of my life gave rise to some of my best drawings for whatever reason. I also listened to a lot of music in school whenever my teachers would allow it, and one band that really grabbed my attention during 9th grade was The Fall of Troy. Although I initially discovered this band in grade 8 with the release of Guitar Hero 3 and the obvious popularity of FCP Remix, I didn't give them much of a chance until high school. I remember that I stumbled across 2 of their songs one day on YouTube, Sledgehammer and Semi-Fiction, and I was instantly hooked. As a matter of fact, the first time I actually set out to buy a CD on my own time with my own money was to get their album Doppelganger. Unfortunately, to my surprise, when I actually ended up listening to that album, I could not stop myself from thinking, what did I even buy this for? Since all of my favorite songs by them back then were like 90% clean singing, I really wasn't ready for all the screaming on that CD. Actually, I didn't even know there was going to be screaming. But I refused to give up listening to it because I paid $10 for that CD, and back then, that was a lot of money to me. So I kept listening to it, and after some time, the screaming no longer seemed like something that was done to be hardcore and trendy, but instead something that really emphasized the aggressive parts of the music and lyrics. The reason I tell you this story is because I've been a huge fan of metal music for a long time, and although The Fall of Troy were closer to post-hardcore than metal, they really were my gateway band to more aggressive music. I mean, it was only a matter of time before I was scouting iTunes for the most brutal underground music I could find. A pretty hipster thing to do, I know. So, while on the topic of music, I should definitely talk about my first ever black eye. It was at an As Lay Dying show with the supporting acts Carnifex, Unearth, and All That Remains. This was the first time I saw an actual mosh pit at a concert, and my friend managed to persuade me to stop being a pansy and go in with him. Unfortunately, I decided that a good time to enter would be during the song 6 by All That Remains. It wasn't, and almost immediately I got hit in the face by an elbow and ended up on the bottom of a sweaty dog pile. Long story short, it was not a good first mosh pit experience. Aside from fighting my way out of sweaty dog piles, there was also another form of exercise I used to get during high school. This was curling, and unlike baseball, I actually enjoyed it. I guess this was probably because I was actually good at it. After about 3 years of playing though, my mom forgot to sign me up for another year, the year I would have been captain of a team. So that kind of put the nails in the coffin of my potential curling career. I'm fine with that though, because I started making more and more videos to fill up the time that would have otherwise been spent doing nothing. As a matter of fact, I got my very first official video camera during the Christmas of 2008. This camera inspired me to give YouTube another try, and I ended up creating a channel called GRC Films. For anybody that couldn't figure it out, those are just my initials followed by films at the end. Creative, I know, right? So I started making these short and cheesy sketch videos where I'd basically just dress up as different characters and talk to myself. I don't really remember when, but I eventually got bored of doing that and deleted all of those videos from YouTube. Fast forward a few months, and me and my friends decided to give our channel Slick Productions another try. We made this mini-series called Slick TV, which only lasted 2 episodes before that also came to an end. Fast forward even later to the summer following 10th grade, and I started using GRC Films again. At this point, you're probably thinking that I have a hard time sticking to one YouTube channel. You would be correct, and I'm still like that today, as the rise of this channel probably suggests. So there I was, a bored kid that had just finished grade 10 with not much to do. At that point in my life, I really enjoyed watching YouTubers that just basically spoke to the camera and added comedy to whatever they were talking about. Two of these YouTubers who I remember inspired me quite significantly back then were Fluffy Talks and Matt G124. For this reason, I set out to make these stand-up comedy-esque type of videos. Keep in mind that this was 2010, so stuff like Dare Matt G was far from being a thing. Instead, his videos like The Dentist and pretty much all the older Fluffy Talks videos were what made me want to give YouTube yet another try. So I gave it a shot, and after about 16 new videos uploaded to my channel, I quit because of what I can only assume to be lack of motivation and interest. Nonetheless, at the time, these videos were the closest I ever came to having an actual fan base for whatever reason. Honestly, I'd probably have to say that these videos were some of the lamest I've ever created. Lucky for you, I still have all these aforementioned videos, and as embarrassing as it is, here's a clip of one for the entertainment value, I guess.
I saw a wizard the other day. No, I'm not going crazy. It was definitely a wizard. I was walking through the mall, and this man passed me. He had a long white beard, long white hair. Actually, think Lord of the Rings. Gandalf, that says it all. He looked like Gandalf.
So as you can see, I had every reason to want to delete those videos. After I did delete them, my main focuses in life were school, hanging out with friends, and just jobs and stuff. There was one place in particular that I worked at, my first job actually, and I could not have asked for a worse first-time experience. Although I won't go into great detail about which store it was for legal purposes, I will tell you that it begins with an I, ends with an A, and has a letter in between those two. As of now, you can find this place on Main Street in Winnipeg, so if you do, don't apply there. There's plenty more places down the road that you can work at. While the store itself was actually pretty good, the owners and managers were partially racist and seemed, for various reasons, to be backstabbers. Aside from a terrible first job, there were some other dramatic and slightly depressing moments during my final few years of high school. But I'm not going to get into that because it's really not much different than the problems other students have to face. Girls, annoying classmates, bad teachers, you get the idea. One thing I will talk about though is the origin of yet another YouTube channel, Mindless Misfits. You see, me and my friends have always been big fans of doing dangerous and oftentimes stupid things. I think a common misconception that people make, judging by some of the comments on our videos, is that we film Mindless Misfits to try and look cool and extreme and hardcore. If you're the kind of person that would think like that, you really couldn't be more wrong. Mindless Misfits started with me and my friends who basically just decided to film the dumb things we already do off of camera anyway. I think the reason for this is because instead of just talking about what we did, we could actually show it on film. I should mention though that filming stupid activities was not the only motivation behind the creation of Mindless Misfits. I hate to sound like an overly emotional crybaby, but Mindless Misfits was also a way to deal with the stress of teenage life. I won't sit here and talk about how difficult my life was because I know very well that some people deal with much more, but I will say that filming stupid things was a way to take my mind off stressful situations. While other people might resort to drugs, smoking, or cutting themselves, I was sliding down hills on McDonald's food trays and experimenting with mouse traps. Times have changed though, and I honestly think that Mindless Misfits still survives today because me and my friends have just enjoyed doing this stuff so much that we refuse to stop now. It's almost like a part of our lifestyles in a dumb sort of way. And while on the topic of lifestyles, I will completely change the topic here and talk about my first ever car. It was a 1991 Honda Civic that was literally painted with house paint by the previous owner. I got this car for my 16th birthday, and as soon as I was able to drive it, me and my friends were going all over the place in that thing. We never really had destinations, but we just enjoyed driving around the city aimlessly and listening to music. Such as Mindless Misfits, cruising pretty much became a part of our lifestyles over the years. And at this point, I might add that we take our cruising very seriously. If you're ever in Winnipeg and see a black Honda driving around with a group of fully grown men inside singing to all kinds of wacky music, that's definitely me and my friends. And I don't just mean singing along like a bunch of giggly schoolgirls, no, I mean sitting there straight-faced trying our very best to hit every scream and falsetto note. I realize it's ridiculous, but it's also great fun. So basically, grade 11 for me was a mixture of school, Mindless Misfits, bad jobs, and cruising. It was during grade 12 that two big things happened in my life. The first has to do with the discovery of an app called Keek, which I found through the previously mentioned YouTuber MattG124. For whatever reason, this app gave me the most popularity I'd ever received on the internet up until that point of my life. And it was so simple, all you did was upload 36-second videos of whatever stupid things you wanted to, so I basically just filmed myself saying and doing things that I thought were funny. Occasionally, I would also upload the odd motivational video because aside from being an idiot, I really do have strong opinions on certain things like suicide, bullying, and human rights. Although that app has people like the Kardashians and the Janoskians on it now, when I started, there weren't many so-called celebrities. For this reason, I quickly became one of the top 100 users and stayed there for a good few months. This led to some fan mail from certain people, such as this one girl from Mexico, which was actually pretty cool. What wasn't so cool though was this other girl and her friend who sent me all these wacky doodles and, no word of a lie, a clump of their hair. Obviously I threw that away immediately, so I can't really prove that it actually happened, although I don't know if I'd want to prove that. The other big thing that happened during grade 12 was the purchase of my Canon Rebel T3i, which I still love and use to this day. I remember that my grandma left me and my sister some money for whatever we deemed worthy to use it on, which I guess was supposed to be school. Nonetheless, I ended up spending, I believe, $700 of that money to buy this brand new camera, and yet, I don't think I've ever really regretted that decision. Since my early adolescence, film has always been a passion of mine, and I think the purchase of this camera just seemed to emphasize that passion. Not only did it lead to some much overdue Mindless Misfits episodes in HD, it also led to an increased interest in photography. I've always loved taking pictures of things, but before my Canon, I've never really had much more than old digital picture cameras to do that with. And the problem with old digital picture cameras is that they often take grainy and blurry photos, which is kind of discouraging when you're trying to capture the beauty of the world. When I got my Canon though, I was so impressed by its picture taking capabilities that I found myself doing photography just as much, if not more, than video production. So with all this said, it's probably no surprise that my interest in film was still going strong by the end of grade 12. It even says in my yearbook that, following high school, I plan to pursue my interests in film and writing. This obviously wasn't a lie, because that's exactly what I ended up doing. So, for those of you who have already forgotten what I said at the beginning of this video, my birthday is on the 10th of November. This made me one of the youngest kids in all of my classes over the years, and I didn't actually turn 18 until I had already graduated from high school. At that point in my life, I wasn't really doing much. I had made the decision to take half a year off before going to university, and during that time, all I really did was film Mindless Misfits with my friends. I actually didn't even bother getting a job, which I guess is kind of pathetic in retrospect. Either way, I eventually went back to school by January 2013 at the University of Manitoba. That first term was unfortunately pretty confusing and slightly discouraging. I didn't really know what the professors expected of me or the best ways to study for my classes, and the fact that university is like a city within a city didn't really help either. Nonetheless, over the past 3 years, I've really grown to appreciate and actually enjoy university. As cliche as it might sound, the reason behind this is because I pretty much just like learning new things. Not only does it make me feel less ignorant, it also helps me respect and appreciate the diversity of our world. I've studied Greek mythology, philosophy, cultural anthropology, psychology, but what's really held my interest so far has been film studies, surprise, right? And religion, probably an actual surprise. Now, I realize that I said in my yearbook that my plans were to pursue film and writing, but to be honest, I haven't really pursued writing. The reason for this is because I've come to realize that this is unnecessary, seeing as university gives me plenty of time to appreciate the art of writing. Going back to the topic of film studies though, these classes not only succeeded in giving me a further understanding, but also a stronger appreciation for film. I've learned about people, genres, and events that had such a big impact on cinema, and yet I hadn't even really heard of any of them before university. The reason I say this is because I really do love film, and long story short, learning about all these things inspired me to once again give GRC films a try. Instead of cheesy sketch comedy videos though, I wanted to try my luck at actual dramatic short films. And believe it or not, that's still what I'm using that channel for today. It probably sounds like a miracle that I finally managed to stick to one video concept on GRC films for just about 2 years now, but it's true. As a matter of fact, I actually ended up deleting my Geek account sometime in 2014 to focus more on GRC films and Mindless Misfits. And unsurprisingly, I'm sure, it was only a few months after deleting my Geek account that me and my friends started a new YouTube channel. We called it Greshu Gaming, and what we continue to do on that channel is make gaming videos. As for the Greshu part of the name, that's unfortunately going to have to remain a mystery. Anyway, fast forward just a few months to 2015, and here I am now, writing a 17-page draw my life narration when I should probably be studying for my exams. So, you might remember me stating at the beginning of this video that I wanted to answer 2 questions: who am I and what do I do? Whether or not I answer these questions to your preferences, I can't really say, but I tried my best to answer them regardless. Basically, I love to make videos and I love to surround myself with art. I once wrote on my Facebook page that I've always been a naturally creative person, and I therefore constantly feel a need to create. In an often unpleasant world, it's something that keeps me happy. And if you can find something that truly keeps you happy, I say go for it. That's what I do, and that's what I'm always going to do. As a matter of fact, that's why I've decided to finally begin using this YouTube account. Ever since signing up for Gmail, I was forced into having both a YouTube channel with the same name as my Gmail and a Google Plus account to make things even worse. This channel has been sitting around unused since May of 2012, all because I never even wanted it in the first place. But since I don't like putting things to waste and I've never really had a channel that's just been devoted to me as a person, I've decided to give this YouTube account a chance. So if you've watched up to this point in the video, you know that I currently have 4 YouTube channels that I actually use. When I'm in the mood to make meaningful short films, I use GRC Films. When I feel like being an idiot, I use Mindless Misfits. When me and my friend feel like uploading gaming content, we have Greshu Gaming. And now I have this personal channel which will cover all the bases that my other channels don't already cover. When I feel a need to upload stuff about myself and my own personal interests, or even just stuff that doesn't fit into the general framework of my other channels, I'll definitely come here. So if you're still with me up to this point in the video and you've enjoyed what I had to say, by all means stick around for the future. As I said before, creating art keeps me happy and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon.